Hey there, everyone, and welcome into another edition of Weather Classroom. I'm Thomas Patrick, meteorologist with Crem 2 News in Spokane, Washington. Hopefully, you all had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. And actually, this recording of Weather Classroom is coming a little bit late. I was anticipating on recording it this past Friday before the holiday weekend, but as to no surprise to anybody that works in my industry, I've been working a little bit extra. Had some live shots on Friday, filled in for my chief meteorologist on Memorial Day Monday. So, bit of a late recording, but hopefully you don't mind. And hopefully this video finds it your way because the topic today is a really cool one. We're talking about eclipses, both lunar and solar eclipses. And we're actually halfway in between a cycle of lunar and solar eclipses as it stands as of this recording. We actually just had the lunar eclipse about a week ago, and that was actually pretty cool to see for some in the western U.S. Others out east didn't have a chance to see it. Myself, it was a little bit too cloudy at 4 o'clock in the morning, so we'll just have to wait for the next one. But they're not too rare. We get them often enough that they are always exciting to see every time they come around, both the lunar eclipses and definitely when we get the total solar eclipses. So I'll be detailing just how you can not only see them for yourself, when to look for them, but how to photograph them as best as possible. I'm a bit of an amateur photographer myself, so hopefully I can give you some insights when it comes to that. But first and foremost, let's go over just what are the eclipses. It's essentially that relationship between the sun, the earth, and the moon, and which of those celestial bodies stands in between the others. I'll start with lunar eclipses. This is when the earth is in the middle and the moon goes into the shadow of the earth. And it's a much larger shadow because the earth is a much larger object. So we often see lunar eclipses more frequently in our lifetimes. And we usually don't have to travel for this. No matter where we are on the globe, we'll be able to see usually a couple of these every decade. And we just had a total lunar eclipse, that one on the far right, sometimes known as the blood moon as well. That's when the moon is completely in the middle of Earth's inner shadow, known as the umbra. And it's actually just a projection of the sun's light that kind of curves or refracts around the atmosphere, giving it that reddish hue, not unlike why our sunrises and sunsets also look red. It's just because that's the wavelength of light that is able to pass through Earth's atmosphere most efficiently. Now, on the other ends of that, we have the partial lunar eclipse, which is only when part of the moon falls in this inner shadow. And on the far left, we have the penumbral lunar eclipse. I usually like to call this one the lame eclipse because it's the least spectacular of any of the eclipses that we can experience. Basically, the moon only hits the Earth's outer shadow, so none of the moon is ever completely obscured. It only looks a little bit more faint than the normal full moon for about an hour or so. But nonetheless, it does count as an eclipse because it's that outer shadow that the Earth casts, that the moon falls between. So those are the lunar eclipses. That's what we just had. We can also see solar eclipses. Oh, before that, I do have the picture here. This was actually from this previous week, a beautiful shot right at moon sets, right before moon rise, right here in Spokane, Washington as well. A beautiful picture there. Okay, now to solar eclipses. This is when the moon is in between the sun and the earth. And in fact, that relationship between the sun and the moon is so perfect that it's almost a miracle that we can get to witness an event like this in our own lifetimes here. The sun is 400 times farther away than the moon, but also 400 times larger. So that appearance in the sky is nearly identical. Not quite perfect, but nearly. But it gives us this grand display known as the solar eclipse. And just like lunar eclipses, there's actually 3 different varieties of that. We have the partial solar eclipse, which is where we only see part of the sun obscured. It's not that it's not quite exactly lined up. The total solar eclipse, that's the one that most of us are trying to see at least once in our lifetimes, and I've done it back in 2017 when we last had the total solar eclipse in the US. There's also one other variety known as an annular solar eclipse. That relationship between the moon's orbit and its distance isn't perfect. In fact, if the moon is a little bit farther away in orbit, which is the opposite of when it's a supermoon, the moon cannot completely cover up the sun in the sky, leaving a ring of sunlight around it. That is called the annular. And those are cool, but they're not quite as spectacular as the total solar eclipse. A couple examples here. This was the picture that I was able to take back in 2017. This is from Carbondale, Illinois. Obviously, it was a little bit cloudy, so maybe not as spectacular as it could have been, but got a great picture of the diamond ring effect as it was just about to end. And this is a picture from NASA from South Carolina, same event, 2017. This one, a clear sky to view the eclipse, and it is just magnificent to see. This is the one. This is the piece de la resistance of all kinds of eclipses, because it is a bit more rare, because we usually have to travel a little bit to align ourselves in the path of the shadow in order to be able to see this kind of eclipse. Most of us will definitely see a partial solar eclipse in our lifetimes, but if we want to see this, we got to be in the right place at the very right time. More on that in a moment, but these pictures themselves are awesome, and they tend to look a little bit better than just what our own camera phones can muster. So here's a little beginner tutorial and a cool experiment that you can do with the kids in order to be able to view and photograph these eclipses for yourselves. Check it out.
For this experiment I'm going to show you today, it's all about viewing eclipses, both solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. And I'll show you both what you need for your camera and if you don't safely view solar eclipses on the course of this pretty short demonstration. Let's start with solar eclipses because they are a bit more rare, a bit more tricky, especially in terms of both photography and viewing overall. First of all, the simplistic thing is get yourself a pair of these. These are Eclipse Glasses. I got these for the 2017 solar eclipse in the US. They basically have a special solar filter where the eye lenses are, and if you try to put them on yourself, you're not going to be able to see anything because it filters out so much light that you can essentially only view the sun very dimly. So it makes it safe for solar viewing, but pretty much pointless for everything else. So get yourself one of these. Couple bucks off of Amazon, pretty simple stuff. But don't wait till the last second before eclipse because then they're in pretty high demand. You'll want the same thing for your camera as well. So I have a pretty simplistic camera. This is a Canon here, but I would never want to point this directly at the sun for more than maybe a second. So to try to get a solar eclipse with this would actually damage the lens or some of the internal workings of my camera. So you'll want to get pretty much the same thing as a solar filter, but for your camera. Obviously, this one is much larger. It wouldn't quite fit on my camera. This was for our own cameras here at our TV station, but it's basically the same thing. It's safe for solar viewing. It's the same stuff that the Eclipse Glasses have, but it's for your camera as well. You put this on your camera and you'll be able to see the very distinct features of a solar eclipse, mainly like the parts of the partial eclipse, which would make it look almost like a cookie cutter. So cool stuff there. So you'll want to get yourself some of that. What if you don't have the Eclipse Glasses? A great experiment you can do with the kids is make a pinhole projector. So get yourself an old shoebox. In my case, I have a printer box here, and this will work perfect because obviously you don't want to look at the sun directly. Make sure to tell your kids that as well. And all you need is shoebox, a little bit of aluminum foil, and some tape to put it all together. Simple as that. You should actually have this all in your home. So basically just you'll want to cut a opening in one of these sides. In this case, it's just the handle itself. That will work perfectly. And then we're going to take a little piece of aluminum foil. We don't even need that big of a piece. Just enough to cover that opening here. So that should work perfectly. And all we're going to do is actually tape that over the opening that you made. If you cut it out, a little bit of Scotch tape should do the trick. And I'll make sure it's one more to make sure that it's flat. And then once you got that in place, you just want to poke just a small hole. If you have a pin, that would be perfect. I'm improvising. I have a nail, so I'm just going to poke as small of a hole as possible. That should be perfect. I got it. I had to make sure that I poked it through the opening in the box here. And that's it. You have your pinhole projector. How does this work? Well, you would take this part, the aluminum foil side, and you would point that at the sun, and I would view that and the projection of the sun on the inside of the box. So from your view, if the sun was in this direction, you would view it here, and that little hole and opening would create a projection of the sun on the other side of the box, thus making it safe to view. Now, if you set this up on an any-day basis, it'll just look like a little hole on the other side, but that's because the sun is circular. During an eclipse, you would actually be able to see the features of the eclipse itself through a very simple activity like this. All right, what about lunar eclipses? We just had one this previous week, It looks pretty simple. You know, a lot of us have probably seen a few in our lifetimes. You might be asking yourself, well, I took a picture with just, you know, my phone camera and it didn't really turn out all that well. And that's okay. I mean, our phone cameras aren't necessarily great for nighttime photography. You got to get a little bit more advanced for that. My camera, again, not the most advanced or technical thing in the world, has what's called an exposure feature. Essentially, the shutter stays open for a few seconds at a time, and I can do as much as 15 seconds, and some more high-tech cameras can even go longer than that. The longer the exposure is, the more light it's going to be able to take in, making it easier to distinguish nighttime features. This is also how you would look for other like star photography, nighttime photography, aurora photography. The key here is that you wouldn't be able to just hold it, because any kind of shaking of your hand would make for a blurry photo, so we will need some kind of tripod. Even one as small as this, as long as it can attach to your camera. In this case, these two aren't compatible. I have a little screw that I can put my own tripod that I have at home onto the base of my camera here. It would pretty much stand up. I would hit the shutter button here, leave it alone for the 15 seconds, and take the picture that way. And that's how you see those beautiful lunar eclipse photos there. But in terms of your own viewing, as long as you can see it, as long as it's nighttime and it's happening, you can see it with your naked eye. So that's how you can do it. Again, use a more advanced camera than the one that you have on your phone, and make sure to never point it directly at the sun. You'll want a filter for both your camera and, of course, for your eyes for the next eclipse that we have in a few years.
Once I got my first tripod, I was just so excited to use my camera to get my first pictures of the lunar eclipse. Now, did you know the next total lunar eclipse in the United States is going to be on May 15th, 2022. There's actually a partial one that's going to happen this November as well, but it's not quite the total lunar eclipse. As for the solar eclipses, the next annular eclipse, the one that has the ring around the sun, that's on October 14th of 2023, and the next total solar eclipse, like the one we had back in 2017, well, that next one is going to be on April 8th of 2024. And again, those are the ones that are in the United States. Obviously, lunar eclipses and solar eclipses can happen all over the world, and there's going to be multiple before these happen just in our neck of the woods if you don't want to travel too far for those. Let's look at those solar eclipse maps, because as I mentioned, when it comes to solar eclipses, you got to be at the right place at the right time. And luckily, the maps to kind of show you the path of the eclipse are so incredibly accurate that we have years to plan ahead of time for that. So here's the 2023 annular eclipse that you see here on the map. This extends from Oregon down to Texas. And again, that's where the moon's a little bit farther away from the Earth, so we don't get the total eclipse. We get that ring of sunlight that will happen for a couple minutes if you're inside the orangish red path. If you're just outside it, you can actually see on the legend here on both the left side and the right side, you get the partial solar eclipse. So most of the US is going to see a partial solar eclipse, but unless you're in this path, that's where the annular solar eclipse is going to be seen. And then the one after that is going to be the total solar eclipse. This is the 2024 eclipse. This path of totality goes from Texas up towards Maine, and this is one that you'll have to make sure to book plans ahead of time, because if 2017 was any indication, people are going to be anticipating to travel to these locations. So, you know, hotels in any of the path are going to be well booked for months. It was actually quite difficult to even find a place to stay myself when I saw that last eclipse in Carbondale, Illinois, which ironically enough is the location in the US that's going to see both the 2017 eclipse that we had a few years ago and the upcoming 2024 eclipse. Carbondale right about here on the map, just to the south of St. Louis, and they were in the path both times, so that is going to be extra cool. How can you tell when those next eclipses are going to be, including the ones after this? Well, I have a site and a resource that you can go to as well. I use a site called timeanddate.com, and this is great for seeing, you know, sunrise, sunset times, moon rises, moonset times, a lot of great kind of simple astronomical resources like that. But their eclipse page is totally awesome. It actually has all the next solar eclipses, and actually the very next solar eclipse that's happening is actually in a week and a half, June 10th. 2021, but notice that the path of totality here goes over the North Pole. So this is mostly a northern Canada, northern Siberia, and the North Pole region. So not too many people are going to be able to see this one. It's actually an annular eclipse as well. The next total solar eclipse is going to be December 4th of 2021, about 6 months from now. Again, that one hits Antarctica only in that case. And then you can just see, partial eclipses. We have the total solar eclipse for Australia and Indonesia in 2023. Here's the annular eclipse that I mentioned as well in 2023, and our total solar eclipse 2024. And you can actually just kind of scroll through and you get the highlighted path of all these. Same story for the lunar eclipses, and this is the reason why lunar eclipses are much more common for us to see in our lifetimes, because when they happen, as long as you're on the night side of the Earth, you get to see the lunar eclipse, as opposed to being in that narrow sliver or path for those solar eclipses. So this is actually the one that we just had on May 26th, which was last week as of this recording. So most of the Americas, Australia, Japan was able to see this one. There's a partial lunar eclipse at the end of this year, not quite total, but most of them end up being total. So there's the 2022 total lunar eclipse, and you can just scroll through. There's actually one more on this page, which is called a transit. And not to kind of wander off into other astronomical events here, but a transit's the same as an eclipse, except instead of the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun, we actually have the Earth, another planet, and the Sun. So in this case, we're actually looking for Mercury transit. So it's when Mercury crosses the face of the Sun. And if you can see it with, those solar filters, you can actually see that dot almost carved out of the Sun's surface. That's the planet Mercury. There's actually a Venus transit, I believe, in 2012, which was very, very rare. But mostly we'll see Mercury transits. Those are also quite rare. The next one that happens is in November 13th of 2032. But cool stuff. Check out this site to see not only like the paths of these eclipses, but even the totality percentages as well. Really in-depth stuff from timeanddate.com. Well, that'll do it for me, and that'll do it for this episode of Weather Classroom. Do make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page right here. You will never miss an episode of that, especially if you have that notification bell turned on as well. You can find me anywhere at Thomas Patrick WX on any social media site. If you have any questions, weather-related questions, even climate stuff, you can always shoot me a message, and I might even consider doing that a topic right here on Weather Classroom. I'm off next week. I'm actually off from work next week as well, celebrating my mom's birthday. She is going to be visiting me for the first time. We are all fully vaccinated. I'm really excited for that. But yeah, no Weather Classroom for next week as well. So look for me in 2 weeks' time. We will likely be covering hurricanes before the end of June here. But that'll do it for now. Hopefully you had a great holiday weekend. Stay cool, especially if you're in the western U.S. It's starting to heat up here in Spokane, Washington as well. I'm meteorologist Thomas Patrick, and I will see you next time for Weather Classroom. Take care, everyone.